Whenever a child reaches a new stage in education, the questions are usually about them. Are they excited? Are they nervous? Will they make friends? Will they cope? But there is another side to transition that we don't talk about enough. What happens when your child seems ready to move on, but you're the one finding it hard? I'm Marie from This Child Can, and today I want to talk about educational transition from a parent's point of view. Because whether your child is going to school for the first time, moving to secondary school, or heading off to university, they're not the only person experiencing a change. Sometimes, rather inconveniently, your child is much less emotional about it than you are. I remember the story of my own first day at school. My mum was expecting me to be upset. She'd probably prepared herself for tears, clinging, maybe one last hug before I reluctantly let go. But apparently, I just waved and said, "Bye, Mum," and trotted off into school without even looking back. My poor mum. There she was, having this huge emotional moment, sending her little girl off to school for the very first time, and I was already gone. There's something quite funny about that from my point of view, but something quite touching too. Sometimes we spend so much time wondering whether our children are ready to move forward that we forget to think about what it might feel like for us when they actually do. Children are growing and changing all the time. Most of the time, it happens so gradually that we barely notice. Then a transition comes along and suddenly there is a very clear before and after. Maybe you've always walked your child to school, and then one day they decide they want to go in with their friends instead. Maybe you've spent years going to school fetes, watching concerts, helping with events, chatting with teachers and feeling like a real part of the school community. And then suddenly you're not needed in quite the same way. The place that has been such a big part of family life starts to feel less like yours. And that's when the thought can catch you off guard. They can do this without me. Of course, that's exactly what we want for our children. We want them to grow in confidence and become capable and manage the world around them. But that doesn't mean it always feels easy when we see that that independence is happening right in front of us. One of the oddest things about transition is that it's often the small, ordinary things that become emotional. The last ever school run. The old school jumper that looked so enormous when your child first put it on. The frantic hunt for a lost shoe when you were already late. Conversations at the school gate or the artwork that proudly came home even if you weren't entirely sure what it was supposed to be. Somehow, things that used to drive you mad can suddenly become strangely precious when they're gone. Because they weren't just routines, they were a part of family life. I think some parents feel guilty for finding transition emotional, especially when their child is happy and excited. You might think, I should just be pleased for them. And of course you are pleased. But pride and sadness can sit together. You can be delighted that your child is becoming more independent and still feel sad that a familiar stage has ended. You can watch them confidently head off on their own for the first time and still remember the much smaller child who once needed you to hold their hand for reassurance. And of course it can feel emotional. This was a stage of family life that mattered to you, and now it's ending. Educational transitions can also stir up things from our own past. Perhaps school was difficult for you. Perhaps you felt lonely or struggled to fit in or went through hard times. Then your own child reaches the same age and suddenly those memories come flooding back. Before you know it, you may find yourself wondering, will they find it difficult like I did? Will they be okay? So stop and ask yourself, am I worried because of something that's happening to my child now or because of something that happened to me back then? Sometimes the answer will be a little bit of both. But even recognizing that can help because your child's experience isn't automatically going to be your experience. Their story is theirs to write, and your experiences can actually help you guide them in that process. There's also something about a big transition that can make parents revisit every decision they've ever made. You may wonder whether you chose the right school, whether you prepared them enough, whether you stepped in too much, or whether there was something else you should have done. This can feel especially raw if things don't go exactly as you hoped. But one difficult morning or even a few challenging weeks doesn't mean you've failed or made a terrible choice. The truth is, none of us has perfect information. We make the best decisions we can with what we know at the time. And remember that most decisions aren't final. A school can be changed. A child may be able to move class, switch subjects, change course, or take a different route altogether. If something genuinely isn't working, we can pause, ask questions, seek support, and look at what can be changed. Sometimes the most important thing isn't getting every decision right first time, but being willing to listen, adapt, and change course when we need to. As a child becomes more independent and eventually leaves home entirely, our feelings can be surprisingly powerful. Researchers have even described the reaction some parents experience as grief-like. Not because anything terrible has happened, but because something important really has ended. The everyday routines, the familiar role you've played, and the simple presence of your child at home. From the time children are tiny, we spend years being the person who helps them with everything. We remind them, guide them, and become part of the everyday moments that shape their lives. Then, little by little, they begin to need us in different ways. And that's the point. That's what we've been working towards. But perhaps there's another way to look at it. Instead of thinking, they don't need me anymore, perhaps we can think, this is what all those years were leading to. The child who can now take those steps without you didn't simply wake up one morning able to do it. They got there through years of being encouraged, reassured, guided, trusted, picked up when things went wrong, and given another chance to try. And perhaps that's the real transition for parents, realizing that the things they can now do for themselves were built through years of your love, support, encouragement, and care. So when everyone asks whether your child is ready for the next stage, remember that you may be adjusting too. You can miss the old stage and still welcome the new one. You can feel proud and sad at exactly the same time. And you can find it difficult to step back while still knowing that growing independence is precisely what you've been helping your child towards. So when your child walks through the school gate, gets on the bus, heads off with friends, or disappears into a new building without you, the thought doesn't have to be, they don't need me anymore. Instead, make it, they can do this now. Because there is something rather wonderful in knowing that the child heading off without you is able to do so partly because of everything you've helped them learn along the way. Even if, like me, they don't give you so much as one backward glance. Thanks for watching. If this helped, please like the video, share it with someone who might find it useful, and subscribe to This Child Can for more clear, practical ways to support children and families. And I'd really love to know in the comments, what was the moment that suddenly made you realise a child in your life was growing up?